Short-term rentals, Airbnb, VRBO, there is so many sites like this to rent your home out and make a ton of income, far more money than you would putting that property into the residential market just for simply rent. And many homeowners have done this, whether it is the entire residence in its entirety or it's just a portion of it, like a basement suite. And this can result in a pretty significant income where you may rent a place for, let's say, $2,500 per month long term, but with a short-term rental, you make anywhere between $4,000 to $6,000 per month during peak season, far exceeding what you would make if you just put it into the rental market. Now, a lot of this in British Columbia changed as of May 1st in 2024, where the provincial government said that if it's not a primary residence, you can really no longer use this property for a short-term rental. And this was all across BC in communities with at least 10,000 people or more, and even smaller communities with a population size that was smaller, well, they could even opt into this new legislation. But that's not what today's video is about. Today's video is about the people that still choose to rent out their properties, maybe their primary residences, maybe a portion of their home, be it a basement suite. This video is to let you know about the massive consequences that you might face by renting your property out short term. A recent tax ruling by the Tax Court of Canada is going to change the short-term rental industry forever and might just leave a hefty tax bill on anybody that chooses to rent their property out short term anywhere in Canada. That's exactly what today's video is about. So if that all sounds interesting and you want to learn a little bit more about this massive tax bill that might be on the way for these people, well, stay tuned. We're going to jump into it right now. Hey, I'm Darren, team leader of a top performing real estate team serving Surrey, BC and the surrounding areas. You might have seen me featured in big media like on Global TV, CTV, or in various newsprints like Business in Vancouver or the Georgia Strait. I created this YouTube channel to help you learn all about the areas of White Rock and Surrey, BC, and to offer a trusted voice for everything going on with real estate in British Columbia. Our team has helped hundreds and hundreds of people just like you buy or sell a home. So if you find yourself looking for help, connect with us by checking out the video description below, where you'll also find tons of valuable information and downloads for both home buyers and sellers. Now, enjoy the video. So many homeowners wouldn't believe that the occasional short-term rental could result in a completely absurd, astronomical tax bill, specifically when they sell their property. You know, you might think, well, how could renting out my property short-term when I'm not there, or renting it out on the weekends, or even renting out my basement suite trigger a huge tax bill? Then what are we talking about here? Well, it all started with a recent ruling in March of 2024 in Ottawa, Ontario. Through this ruling, the Tax Court of Canada indicated that homeowners who have regularly rented out their property on sites like Airbnb or VRBO or other short-term rental sites will be subject to paying 13% HST when putting the home up for sale. And while we don't have HST in British Columbia, we of course have GST coming in at 5%. You see, the problem lies here that renting out a property short term may reclassify the property from residential to commercial under something called the Excise Tax Act. And these tax rules apply to any property type, regardless of whether it's a condominium, a townhome, or a detached home. Importantly, there is a 90% threshold that would need to be hit to take a property deemed residential and redeemed as commercial. Now, while this seems like something that may not be necessarily easily attained, I'm going to share with you a real world story of this actually happening to somebody and what happened to them in terms of a tax bill. And spoiler alert, it's a massive, massive number. It all started in Ottawa, Ontario, where a homeowner originally rented out a unit on a long-term lease of more than 60 days for a period of about 9 years. However, in 2017, the homeowner decided to list his property on Airbnb and leased it for periods of continuous short-term rentals for 14 months prior to selling their home. Just real quick, doing the math, they owned it for about 10 years at that point and only used it for short-term rentals for approximately about 1 out of those 10 years. When the owner sold the property in April of 2018, he didn't pay HST. Sometime after closing, the Minister of National Revenue assessed that the unit changed from residential to commercial use, which meant that the HST was collectible upon the sale. That means consistent long-term leasing is still considered residential use, but short-term short-term rentals are considered commercial use. The decision was appealed, but in March of this year, the court determined the property, when sold, wasn't a residential complex as it operated similarly to a hotel. It was being leased on a short-term basis, fully furnished with the homeowner covering the cost of utilities. As a result, the entire sale price of the condominium was not exempt from HST. So that is completely mind-boggling. And one of the big takeaways is that tax law is incredibly complex and there is a ton of loopholes involved. Just by diving into this article where this information came from, the first consideration is whether a property is deemed to be for residential use or for commercial use. Residential properties are generally exempt from GST or HST when sold if they are used as a primary residence or rented out for long-term residential purposes. However, under the Act, if a property is used consistently for short-term rentals, it's treated as a commercial property rather than a residential one. This reclassification triggers the GST or HST upon the sale. And there's other considerations like whether the property has been used for hotel-like operations, or you've met the threshold for commercial classification, which, as I mentioned earlier, is around 90%. This suggests that if a property is rented short-term, which could be considered less than 28 days per rental, at least 90% of the time, it could be classified as commercial. This threshold isn't well defined. Now, this threshold isn't really well defined, and the ambiguity in this threshold could be the site for future court cases that will clarify the law on this even further. This left me wondering about someone who maybe uses their basement suite, as an example, as a short-term rental, but they live in maybe the upstairs as a primary residence. How might this recent ruling affect them? Well, for the GST or the HST to apply, the CRA would need to classify that 90% threshold has been met and has reclassified the residential property as commercial. And this is a lot harder to justify when only a portion of the property has been used as a short-term rental. But here's the really interesting piece of this. In some cases, if the CRA determines that a portion of the property was used for frequent short-term rentals and accommodations, it may try to apply the GST or HST to the sale price. This would likely be proportionate to the portion of the home that was used for these purposes. And if you think of the size of the average basement suite, and let's just use a number that says it takes up roughly about 25% of the home, the CRA might apply either GST or HST to 25% of the sale price of that home. They might proportionally apply that to the sale, which could be a massive, massive number. So we had the Airbnb announcement from the BC government that came in earlier this year, as mentioned earlier in the video. And now we have this recent court ruling, which presents some pretty obvious issues, but also some that you might not have considered. Clearly, the obvious ones are there is going to be way less short-term rentals available on the market. So if you like holidaying anywhere in British Columbia, you might be subject to staying in hotels instead. This is because a lot of these short-term rentals have been completely wiped out. And if you are directed to a hotel to stay in instead, well, you guessed it, that means hotel prices are going to go up. And in fact, they already have up at least 20% as of when the new BC rule regarding short-term rentals came into effect. This also has affected industries like the film industry, who really relies on having short-term rentals available because their crews are kind of in and out of communities when they are shooting in them. Let's put this whole thing into perspective and use some numbers to really help you wrap your head around how massive of a deal this really is. Let's imagine you have the average home in Surrey that ends up being reclassified as a commercial property when you sell it, and the property's value or its sale price is $1.6 million. That means you now have a potential tax bill, because you're only paying GST, of approximately $80,000 that you weren't prepared for on that sale. Now, that's for the whole home, but I'm going to go even further, because if that home is also reclassified as a commercial property, when you go to sell it, you might also lose your capital gains exemption, also now triggering the requirement for you to pay taxes as though that money gained or that capital gain was income. This is a huge wake-up call for for anybody that is engaged in using their properties or property that they own as short-term rentals in British Columbia. So with the right information and advice, not necessarily coming from me, a real estate professional in Surrey, BC, and if you love learning about Surrey, BC, White Rock, BC, or anything like this to do with British Columbia real estate, don't forget to subscribe. But you want to get the right advice prior to engaging in these types of activities. So whether that is a certified professional accountant or a real estate lawyer, you need to know the implications of using a property for short-term rentals before you get involved, because obviously the fallout and the tax bill could be absolutely massive. And this also lends to the fact that you need to stay educated on the changes happening in the market and the changes happening within our province at all times. Exactly what this channel is dedicated to. The CRA's recent push for tax enforcement in real estate sales really underscores the importance of understanding rental laws and regulations. And if you're interested in learning more about rental laws and regulations and you live in British Columbia, you're gonna wanna check out this video coming up next, which goes over all of the reasons why we as a real estate group no longer recommend to anybody that they invest in residential real estate with the intention of becoming a landlord and making a property available to tenants. You're gonna find this next one incredibly interesting, so check it out. It's coming up next. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and we'll see you on the next video. Cheers.